Welcome back, everyone. We're here today for Module 4 of our journey, which is a session on leadership and organizational resilience. So we're moving really from a session 2 modules ago on personal resilience. And then last time we deepened into the basic practices, how we can unleash our superpowers to meet trauma with presence, with relatedness, with creativity. And we just especially deepened our practice together of presence, creating space, self-regulation, attunement, sensing, I feel you, feeling me, co-regulating, and how to build coherence in groups. And that's really where we're going to continue today. Also, happy next time we'll have Jens Riese, who will bring in the topic of leadership and team resilience. So it's very interesting coming from this personal trauma, which we explored with you last time, and now go to the organization, and then in a way bring the two together in terms of how we work in our teams. So thank you for being here with us today, and over to you.
Thank you, Kosha. Hello, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're located. Yeah, we'll continue our session. Last time you had a journey into different practices of regulation and co-regulation, which are very important. Today, we'll dive a little bit deeper into leadership and organizations and see how trauma plays a role in both, in me as a leader and in the organization and its interplay. I will speak a little bit slower so that our translators don't have such a hard time the next 2 hours. But before, let's come back again to the practice, because anyhow, whatever is the content we are looking at, if we want to become more trauma informed, it's also a practice we have to commit to. And the practice helps us to resource ourselves and others and have a way back to our inner resourcing in case we get activated, triggered, and into difficulties. And so we will use the beginning of our session again to do a short practice. It also brings us into the room, puts our nervous system into a different state, connects us here. And then we continue. And it's also that, in a way, like for organizations, coherence building tools are one way how to strengthen organizational resilience. And so what we do now is something, I think, that can be in a little bit, of course, changed forms, be used in our organizations. And it starts with my own inner state. So when you look coming into this call, how do you feel? So if I take a screenshot, like I find a way how in a short time I can assess my physical, emotional, mental experience. I can, maybe you're very relaxed right now, maybe a bit tense in the body. Maybe you can tell what emotion is present in you. Maybe it's hard to tell. Maybe your mind is very active and busy. Maybe your mind is spacious, calm. And whatever you find, it's great. We just find it. That's the point. And then we can use again our friend, the breath, and even slow down a little bit our breathing. And every time you exhale, it invites you to drop deeper into your body. Let's try that for a few moments. Every time I exhale, the slow down exhalation takes my nervous system a little bit more into relaxation mode. And then you just feel, where is it pleasant to sit, grounded? Where do you feel that your body is energized, flowing, streaming, pulsing, warm, present? Where you can enjoy a little bit the simplicity of just sitting, breathing, listening, sensing. And we can count on the grounded, integrated parts of ourselves. It's like soil, it's ground, it has roots. There we feel connected. And we can enjoy. And still, your breath is gently inviting you with every exhalation to notice a little bit more of that grounding. And from that more rooted, grounded place, you can also check in, okay, so how grounding is a movement that slowly drops into the body, into the roots. And stress is a movement that sends our life energy up into thinking, action, reaction. So I can notice, how stressed do I feel right now, and how stressed do you feel now? Notice the sensations you call stress, restlessness, activation, stress hormones in your body, a lot of thinking. It's hard to concentrate on the body. And that's all fine, and we want to embrace that too. Say, yes, it's okay to be stressed. It's perfectly fine. But we are aware of it. It's a conscious stress. And then we check in with our emotional experience. What's your emotional experience right now? And sometimes I feel strong emotions, gentle emotions. Sometimes I can't say really what I feel. It feels a bit numb. Whatever it is, it's perfectly fine. And then if you take a moment to look what's actually aware in you that you feel yourself. I feel my body. I'm aware that I feel my body. What is aware right now? And then gently, if you open your eyes, stay connected to your inner sensations, and then look at us as you practiced already last time. And that you can look at your screen and like you expand your sensing from within your body. You look at some people and you check in how different people feel today, how everybody brings a different quality into the room. And like this, we practice. On the one hand, I feel you, and I also feel you feeling one of us. Like I feel you feeling. I feel your attention. I feel your relational capacity. We can check in with a few people. I feel you, and I feel you feeling one of us. A great leadership skill. And then you can feel also what's the group quality that we create when we do that? What's the presence here? What's the quality between us when we feel each other? And maybe since there was one question that came in about group coherence, maybe Kosha, can you just read this one question, the group coherence question?
Absolutely, yeah. It's two questions about the
Let's
same
start
topic.
with the first one, the group coherence.
Yeah. So it's both Rachel who just asked about, could we speak more about group coherence as a practice and how we might facilitate that? And then Mohammed who said, how can we determine the cultivation of an effective co-regulation, group coherence, and trauma-informed leadership in a setting of scarce resources in low-income countries in Africa like Sierra Leone?
Yeah, so I want to respond first to the first question and then the second question a bit later. What we did right now, as you can, sorry, I just came out of COVID last week. When we practice attunement, I feel you feeling me. We said last time, actually, we are not. There's a term that I like very much. It's called intra-acting. Instead of interacting, intra-acting. And interacting implies that when I look at you, you are already arising in my central nervous system. And we build coherence with somebody in our organization, with our families, or with the society by clearing our perception of each other and making that perception as clear as possible. So coherence building is paying attention to how the world arises in me, which is included in the practice. I feel you feeling me. Because then I need to pay attention to you and me, and you pay attention to me and you, how Thomas arises in everybody that's listening to him right now. So there are many small Thomases here. And when there's group coherence, then the Thomas that is a wave field, like energy, information in many people, and the Thomas that is a particle become more alike. Incoherence means that the Thomas in the perception and the Thomas in the particle, they are different. And we know that in the gap of our perception, a lot of stuff is happening. A lot of miscommunication, a lot of broken feedback loops, less data flow, less coherence, more incoherence, or with other words, absence. So when I as a leader need to process my organization mostly cognitively, because it's hard for me to feel my organization, I'm lacking a lot of information. So if I want to be informed, that there is a form inside, as we said in the first module, I have a trained cognitive capacity or intellectual capacity that is synchronized with my sensing capacity. And then things make sense, which means I can think and feel them at the same time. And I believe that that's a tremendously important leadership skill. So group coherence is a clarification of perception. That's why thinking about group coherence is not enough. I need to be able to live it. If I can't live it, it's just an idea. Where it's really lived is if I can embody it, if I can walk my talk. If I can just talk and not walk, then it's half the learning. Because co-regulation only works when my heart's open, when I really care about you. If I don't care about you, then I can talk to you, but you will feel me like a sterile person in the room. If I care about you, you will feel me as a warm person, as a related person, as a caring person. That creates trust. I feel you feeling me creates trust. One nervous system picks up authenticity from another nervous system. And we all have a very good sensor for what's authentic. And we also have a very good sensor for, I hear you say that, but what I feel and what I hear is not the same. That makes me a bit suspicious. And maybe that's not even out of a bad meaning, that's out of an internal disconnect, out of absence, not because the person is ill-meaning. Sometimes that's also the case, but sometimes it's also that we are not even aware that we don't feel, because that's our natural state. And that's where trauma-informed leadership comes in. Why? Because an organization is an organizing principle, organizing everybody within an organization and the data flow between them into a coherent whole. So all the people that work in that organization, plus all their relationships among them that give a bigger sum than the particles together, all of that entity is following a higher organizing principle that is fueled by the intention and the original impulse, founding impulse, and the intention that all the people can hold as their mission. So that is a line, and around the line we have a circle. That's the organization. So the organizing principle is supposed to organize the organization. And what we need for this is a relational data flow. The better is the relational data flow, the easier it will be for the organization to follow the mission, the intention. Now, when trauma comes in, trauma we said last time, trauma is not a bad thing. Trauma is a response of our biological system and our psychology to an overwhelming event. But because it was so overwhelming, something happened inside. And if that's not being restored, it leaves a strong residue. That residue, that trauma that sits now in our bodies or in our organizations, is a disorganizing principle. Trauma is creating disorganization, which means it blocks data flows and it creates sand in the engine. It creates recurrent patterns that are hard to open up because as long as we don't find the source, it's hard to change them. And then we put all kinds of change attempts on top of it in order to take care of what seems dysfunctional, which I think is not so relevant because we are just putting a patch, a band-aid on top of something that's still bleeding. And so group coherence or high-level relational capacity and relational data flow create coherence and create an intelligence, an organizational intelligence. Trauma reduces that and starts to disorganize certain parts of the organizational intelligence. And the disorganization creates symptoms. So that's number one. That's very important, I believe. When we are talking about trauma, we are talking about something that's disorganizing the regular data flow. It's like a distortion that the data flow needs to go through. What that might mean is, for example, if I, as a leader of an organization, carry trauma that is attached to a certain personality type. If in my organization is somebody with that personality type, I won't be able to be informed. That person can't arise fully in me. So if I don't like bullies and I was bullied and I am traumatized from being bullied, I will not know how to deal with it. And then in this moment, I feel separate from the person, which is a disorganizing moment. Because I will react to that person because I don't have the skill set to deal with that person. And this is just one example. It can be many other things. So when something meets or criticism, if I am traumatized because I had very critical parents and it was always painful, and then I meet the person that is criticizing me, I won't be able to respond to criticism and discern what's healthy criticism, what's creative feedback for me, what's not healthy criticism, what is not relevant for me. I will respond to that criticism not out of my full capacity as a grown-up human being. That creates a disorganizing moment. If in an organization there are many disorganizing moments between many different people, it lowers the organizational coherence, which means it lowers the intelligence of that organization. And since we weren't very well informed until, let's say, the last 20, 30 years, we didn't know the basic mechanics of trauma. So we call that all kind of things, and often we try to take care of those things like symptomatically. Like I see a symptom and I try to take care of the symptom, versus I see the symptom, I see the origin, and we can take care of the origin, which helps the organization to grow. So whatever, especially in a leadership function, my own degree of traumatization is one of the main factors that casts a shadow into the whole organization. If a CEO of an organization is traumatized, this organization will be in the entire organization. But often we don't make that link because it's first it's hard sometimes to see directly, but there will be effects. But not only the highest leadership, any kind of team leader or any kind of employee or person in the organization or volunteer, we all bring trauma into organizations. That's why I think of course, we are not becoming now trauma experts. That's also not needed. But I need a certain basic understanding of what I'm dealing with so I can respond to certain situations more skillfully. So what we said so far is that group coherence, you arise in me and I arise in you. I walk into a hospital, I walk into my company, I walk into the NGO that I'm working for, and I feel the place, I feel the organization, I feel the people because they arise anyway in me. And that's a sense that I believe in volatile or VUCA times, or there are different ways to describe this, but in times of uncertainty, presence and high relational skills, I believe, are the answer to uncertainty and not knowing. Especially when things become more rocky, as it's happening at the moment. We need a grounded relational space that dares to step into uncertainty. If I don't dare to step into uncertainty, I will become an over-controlling relic of the past. Because in the moment I'm holding on to how things were, I'm lost, especially as a leader, because then the organization will get tighter and tighter and has less and less emergence and capacity to innovate because we are getting too scared. And so upgrading our relational coherence, being able to be in a self-reflection process as a leader, to at least have a deeper understanding of my own trauma history and how that trauma history might have effects without immediately trying to not have that, because we cannot not have that, but we can be aware of it, which reduces already the effects. Second thing we said is coherence building tools are tools to support relational support systems in an organization, strengthen feedback loops, strengthen transparency and honesty and authenticity, giving spaces in organizations to digest bigger impacts on the organization. So that I know, like myself, when something impacts me stronger, I need a space to digest it. If I just suppress it, it will back up. My storage one day will be full. And then I run into a burnout, or I am fed up, I'm not motivated anymore. I feel more depressed. I feel that I don't have the energy or the creativity to deal with things. If I refresh my browser again and again, and I digest the impact that things have on me, I keep my nervous system dynamic, creative, and vital. So pushing the reset button or the refresh button is an important mechanism so that I can integrate and digest and integrate my own stress and my own undigested moments. So every time I have an interaction that was difficult, I had a board meeting that was difficult, I had something happened outside in the ecosystem of my organization that was difficult, that we have spaces to digest that personally. I think it's important, but also sometimes organizationally. And I think we're putting too little resources to digest bigger organizational impact, which reduces the motivation of an organization. So there is the impact that leadership, or like the trauma of leadership, has on the organization. There is, and that's something that we can't do much about, but we know that most of the people that come to work in organization carry at least a smaller lunch package of trauma in themselves. And if many people work together, that becomes a lunch. And so that but when we know that, then it's part of something that's part of our daily work processes, and we can identify the symptoms that creates. If we don't know that, then we have a lot of problems that we try to deal with, but they are hard to deal with because they are persistent. And and then we said that trauma in itself is a disorganizing function, and it works it looks like, at least, that it kind of blocks the organizing function. It blocks data flows, it creates conflicts between people, frictions, envy, it creates all kinds of interpersonal dynamics, miscommunication, broken feedback mechanisms, and then I want to speak a bit, and then we can, the second part of the call, we can do again more Q&A. But I'm just bringing in some of the principles. Then I want to speak a little bit to what happens. So the organizational coherence is also equals resilience. The maturity and the coherence, these are my resources. These are the resources that the organization can come back to when we go as an organization through more difficult times, because that's our base. That's also our base if something happens to the organization, like many people need to be laid off because there's a financial crisis, or there's trauma that happens in the organization, that something happened, like a scandal or something happened that is hard to digest. So if there's an intra-organizational trauma, we need to develop processes how to digest it as an organization. Because if I don't have any processes in place, I will try to not have that trauma and kind of continue as usual and try to forget it. Like, let's get over it. But let's get over it means that the organizational system needs to suppress that somehow. And it will take some time. Maybe it will look like that it works at the beginning, but it will produce symptoms, of course, because the human system needs to digest that. So having certain processes in place, like how we as teams or an organization can create a digestion space for that bigger impact, is key in that sense. And it might even lead to the fact that if we do that in a facilitated way, in a skillful way, then it will lead to the organizational resilience. It will give us the feeling, oh, we went through some hardship together, we took care of it, we learned something from it, and we deepen our capacity as an organization. That's actually a beautiful learning process. If I don't look at it and we just gloss over it, then it will strengthen the fragmenting forces in the organization. A second a second intra-organizational process is that there is some kind of absence in the organization that allows certain things to stay recurrent. Like there's a recurrent bullying going on. There's a recurrent sexual harassment. There is recurrent racist tendencies. There's certain, or there's strong power abuse of leadership. And so if a system is very awake, then it will very quickly bring that to the surface of the organization so that we can't look besides it. We have to look at it. But if a system is less awake and more numb, then those recurrent processes will take place. So it happens once, and instead of the organization learning something and transcending that tendency, it happens again and again. If it happens again and again, something doesn't work. We touch like an unconscious place in the organization. And that's why often in some organizations are vulnerable due to their leadership or due to other things to absence, like the absence that is able to feel certain tendencies before they happen or before they create a bigger impact. It's like in some family systems, we see that often abuse in family systems creates a numbness that creates a new level of abuse in the next generation. Although many people say, no, this will not happen because it happened to me, I will prevent it. But actually, we often see that it creates another cycle of abuse because we weren't aware of something. And so organizational absence is something we need to pay attention to. And as I said, in organizations, things are going to happen because many people might work together. But if they happen again and again, then it's an alarm signal, because then we don't have the right processes in place to stop that. And so the unconscious dimension needs to be made conscious. And so when we are looking at the learning process, so how can an organization learn from those kind of situations and turn that learning into an upgrade of resilience, of values, of ethical guidelines, and also like an upgrade in the whole organizational intelligence, and become more inclusive, which means the organization also can work on a wider spectrum in the world than before. So it's always like an expansion of capacity if we integrate those issues that come up. And then on a wider level, so we had the leadership, we had in general this organizing principle of trauma, we had intra-organizational traumatizations or resilience. And now when we open it up, it's also clear when we have an organization within its ecosystem, which within the society or within the clients that it serves or the part of the world that it serves in. And when we look there, we can see two things. Like one is trauma or collective trauma that an organization caused, like through, I don't know, accidents in chemical companies, to environmental damage, because scandals happened and people got hurt, like bigger impact within the society that needs to be restored and repair. But also many NGOs, and that's what we also designed this course for, are working with trauma in the field, like with some kind of trauma in the society. Like many of us are part of the firewall of the society to protect the society from the trauma impact. And that's where we need our organizational resilience. Because the fragmenting factors within the organization, when they come in touch with strong traumatization we deal with, for example, through natural disasters or through a war or through other bigger impacts, or in society when an organization works with gender violence or strong healthcare issues, then we are exposed to trauma all the time. And we need a process to strengthen the organization inside, because if the outside trauma exposure gets stronger, inside the trauma will start to rattle, go in resonance with it. So the organization will deal with stronger and stronger fragmenting signs, so that it's harder and harder to keep the organization in a healthy way together, because more symptoms will show up. So for everybody who works in stronger trauma environments, our resilience, which is a combination of personal maturity, trauma integration, relational capacities, organizational coherence building, and other things. So the coherence of an organization is the power that can withstand the disorganizing factors in the environment. Because trauma doesn't only disorganize systems from within, like a company or an NGO, but it also has a disorganizing effect as a secondary trauma impact when we work in war zones, for example, or when we work in countries that have been poverty stricken, and there's a lot of trauma from colonialism, for example, as we heard before. In Sierra Leone, for example, when there is already a lot of pre-existing trauma environment and aid organizations want to work there, we are exposed all the time to the trauma fragmentation. And that means that we need to be very strong inside. And strong means integrated and mature. And so our personal and organizational resilience will determine what's our fuel that we have available for a long time to deal with very strong external factors. And that includes also one level of resilience building in very strongly fragmenting environments, is to be well connected, to be part of a network. We need to resource not only ourselves, that we have some support, that we have a personal support system. We also need to resource our organizations. So to have, for example, if we work in different parts of the world, that we have an international network of organizations that are kind of like a support network. That's, for example, an intelligent network building that gives each organization more resilience, because we are connected to a wider resilience building network. It's an overarching holding space. And so how we create kind of a healing architecture that can withstand or kind of respond to a lot of trauma that we work with in a healthy way, sustainably for a long time, in an integrative way. And what I mean by integrative, it's not only that we manage to be there, but it's that we upgrade our intelligence while we work there. So we grow, even in very difficult environments, we constantly make that our growth. We turn that into growth, into post-traumatic learning. And if we can do that, we stay an innovative force in the field even in very challenging environments. And I think that's a high level, but I think that's what trauma-informed organizational leadership can provide. That it's not only that we manage to be there and manage to take care of the hardship or the challenges, but that we turn them into learning. If we can turn them into learning, we always create more energy than was there before us. We actually create an added value that keeps on adding value within the system that we are working in. And that creates a lot of trauma integration around us. So we onboard trauma and turn it into soil. We onboard trauma, turn it into soil. And like this, we create what I would call like generator organizations that keep on generating more and more energy. Like it's like an engine that creates more energy than it uses. So it turns scarcity into abundance, scarcity into abundance. And it might be that many aid organizations feel a certain level of scarcity, and then the scarcity also happens within the organization. So that's a sign that there is a kind of a resonance between the inside and the outside. If we manage to turn that around, we will create more abundant organizations that create more abundance within their ecosystem. That's what it means to have a functional trauma-informed organization. That it doesn't pull us down, the opposite. It lifts us up. We harvest the energy of the trauma and we turn it into health. If we can do that as organizations, something works. If we just barely survive too, something doesn't work fully. I mean, it's good, it's still good because it helps a lot, but it's not good for the whole system because somebody suffers. If aid workers burn out, it was good and also not. Because of course it helped something, but then we gave up because we couldn't continue anymore. That's not sustainable. And so to turn trauma into more energy that enriches the systems, that becomes, because trauma is frozen life, what we want to is to melt the energy, harvest the energy that is stored, and turn it into new structures of society. So we want to harvest the energy that is stored in the ice, integrate it, and turn it into innovation and growth. And that's a fantastic line of development. And so I think that should be the aim for like working on how organizations, and I'm talking now about organizations that work a lot, like many NGOs do, in environments that are challenging or dealing with a lot of trauma. I think it really works when we can turn it and we feel that we all grow, and we grow in abundance. We don't just barely survive, because then somehow we stay in the scarcity. And we want to attract more energy to do more good and attract more energy to do more good, so that our organizations grow and flourish. Then it's a sign that we got the trauma integration right, that there is a flourishing. We see this in individual trauma patients, that when the trauma therapy really works, then there's more aliveness, there's more fluidity, there's more ability to participate in life, there's more creativity. I can come back into developing my potential in the world. What was frozen starts to move again. And so if the frozen river melts, we want to harvest what was frozen and use it for development. And I think to have systems in place that are trauma integrating, and for example, startup environments that use the freed up energy for cultural or social or economic innovation, which is very important in countries or in places where because of the trauma, depression, also the economic resources are very scarce. And so there's a lot of poverty. It's hard to jumpstart something because the energy is very low. So it's hard to turn that into movement. Whereas in other parts or for other people, it's very easy to turn something into movement and create projects and find the right people to do it because there's a lot of movement anyway. And that's why I think connecting trauma integration to social innovation, for example, and to combine those ecosystems is a very good way how to integrate trauma and create a higher social value. So to upgrade the entire system so that the entire system can jumpstart itself again and take over functions and grow them, because that gives also personal or community or area agency. And that agency creates again motivation. And if we are motivated, we can build more. So we create sustainability, self-responsibility, and flourishing environments. So that's what I think is a good plan. And especially for NGOs now, or organizations like also hospitals that deal a lot with, or the healthcare system deal a lot with trauma exposure every day, that we have the right skill set in place. And maybe the last thing is that I think especially also within our bigger ecosystem, we will talk about this more in one of the later modules, but that trauma that has been caused by organizations, either on the level of our nature, that kind of an exaggerated growth or an exaggerated exploitation factor created a lot of biodiversity trauma, which is also kind of human trauma, obviously. Smaller or larger organizations that cause some trauma, like how can we motivate or how can we make a step also in leadership? And there are already some examples that say, yes, we turn around and we will be part of its restoration. Like to take the social responsibility that it takes to face damage or trauma that has been caused by organizations and make that our learning and turn that into an example how we as organizations can take responsibility, work on the integration, and create a new, bigger value for the organization and for the ecosystem that happened in. And I think that's on the leadership level, like however small or big that impact is, I think if we can become more and more an example that we don't want to deny this, hide it, let it be unrecognized for some time, but really open it and integrate it, we set examples how we deal with this kind of situations. And I think that's also based on trauma awareness, because those things won't disappear. They will stay in the system until somebody takes care of it. Because we know that the sentence, time heals all our wounds, is not fully true, because time is sometimes created by our wounds, and that we live so much in the past means that we are still carrying our wounds into our daily lives, into our parenting, into our education system, into our workplaces, into our families. But being responsible, and especially in a leadership position, setting an example what that means, I think is an inspiration for everybody around us. And so that's why I think from the small incidents in our daily experience up to the big incidents or trauma impact, I think there's a lot still to learn, but there are many possibilities to set examples how we deal with it, and we upgrade our ethical experience of life and ethical way of living. And so for that, I think at the base of every trauma healing is an ethical upgrade. And I think especially in organizations, that can be a strong influence within our global society. Yeah, since I spoke a lot, let's take a moment first to do what we also say. Make a little space to digest. Maybe I will slowly summarize it, but we give a moment to just digest so that we can also feel, not just think, but feel how that applies to our daily experience. Which parts of what I talked about resonate within you? Do you recognize from your daily work experience? And then just by looking at maybe an organization that you're working in at the moment, what are the recurrent issues? Like that we try to fix already for a longer time, but we somehow don't manage. It keeps happening again and again. So maybe you can identify something that would fit that category in your organization. And then when you identify something like a recurrent process that seems to be repetitive and non-emergent, which means it doesn't really change, then with what we studied until now in terms of trauma, when we look, okay, these are the symptoms. So what's one floor deeper? Like, how does this relate, this symptom that you identified, to trauma? Then when you look also with what we learned so far, what would be maybe different way to approach that organizational pattern differently, more at the root? You can just do it for yourself. It's what we spoke about. We already uncovered some of the basic trauma principles and also ways to detect those, and beginning skill set to respond. And my other question is, how much do you apply systemic sensing within your organization? Not just systemic thinking, which is great, but also systemic sensing. That when I walk into my office, when I walk into, or when I get in, if it's a bigger organization, if I have a felt experience of the organization that I'm part of, What about that practice? Is this something that's close to you, that's new to you? Something that's part of your daily assessment of what's happening? Part of your metrics? When you sit in a board meeting or any kind of meeting, is there what's about the holding spaces? Who has an awareness of the entire group in the room or the team? Who's dialed into the atmosphere? So as we said before, when we can combine our intellectual understanding of processes and our embodied sensing, which is not only feeling emotions, that's one part of it, but it's being aware of atmospheres, of people's interactions, of the relational dynamics in the room. Like there is a higher awareness because somebody is aware. It's kind of systemic awareness building. And if more people do that, then the organization, through those people, creates a holding space of its process. It's like here. I mean, we can see this here as we are sitting here. Either I'm here cognitively or I'm here cognitively. I'm connecting to the content and I'm connected to the embodied sensing of people on my screen. I'm aware of the systemic process. And it's a little bit the same like in leadership positions. If we sometimes give public talks or seminars or whatever is our job, or we hold team meetings, board meetings, whenever somebody gives a public talk, we can pretty much sense if, for example, somebody is afraid to speak in front of people or an audience and is already a bit protected while he or she speaks. Or the person who speaks can feel the audience and hold the audience in his or her awareness. If that happens, like everybody is spoken to feels much more part of the words that are being spoken. They don't feel separate. They feel more unified. I feel included in what you're saying. But if somebody is a bit more defensive or scared or careful or back and speaks, then, or overpowered. Another form of being scared is to be too much, like to be over the top. But in both, either if it's over the top or if it's held back, everybody who listens needs to consciously or unconsciously manage that while listening. So the data flow is less optimal. But if I'm standing with a regulated nervous system that is in the social engagement zone, that is regulated and relational, then that's the optimal equilibrium to transmit information. It feels more relaxed, it feels warm, it feels connected, can feel very clear and still warm and connected. And it's relational. Kind of it's based on resonance. There's a felt experience of a group or an audience or a team. And since there was at the beginning the question, what creates group coherence or collective coherence, that's what creates it. That's one element when we can sense each other, and while we transmit intellectual content, that transmits the coherence that the person is in, that is a leader, a speaker, somebody who convenes a meeting. That holding space has a cohering function. And if many people in an organization can hold that kind of systemic sensing space, it will reduce the systemic absence. It contributes to systemic presence. And if people are stressed in the organization, or if people are kind of edgy or triggered or even conflicted, that holding space provides a very different environment for a resolution, for listening, for down-regulating stress, for coming back to creative solutions. So that's a very powerful capacity to train. But of course, if I'm very stressed, then it's harder for me to hold such a space. Then I need some self-regulation first, obviously. But these are great skills. So maybe we can transition to some more Q&A time and develop the rest of the session through, I'm sure there are many very interesting perspectives on what we are talking about. Hand it back to you, Kosha. And
thank you so much, Thomas. I think there was, especially when you were speaking about this, our ability, even in very hard situations, to come to a place where we can continuously meet and melt the scarcity, the ice, and through the melting actually start becoming an engine that creates abundance. It's so hopeful, and yeah, it just brings a whole new possibility. Yeah. And there were many questions around the practical approaches, and through the sensing exercise you just did with us, you already brought us closer. But I wonder whether you could give an example of what a digestion process in an organization of, say, 30, 50 people could look like concretely, or an integration, a trauma integration process. Just make that a bit more concrete for us.
yeah, sometimes it can be as simple things as creating an offsite process, like creating a digestion process where smaller circles within the organization can meet and people can just share how they feel about the situation. And they are being listened to. It's not about discussing, it's not about arguing, it's not about if you're right or wrong. It's more about allowing a space that is maybe slightly facilitated, that ensures a safe environment, that people can just speak to something that happened. Let's say an organization goes through a deeper crisis, 25% of the employees have been released, and there is a lot of fear in the organization now. How can we work on this to turn that into, like, again, an openness and a trust versus a kind of a retraction and more separation? And I think if it's done well, then allowing that to speak and having a few rules, the way how we interact, that we don't interrupt each other, and that people keep to a certain time frame, and that we listen to each other's experiences more from an explorative place. And that we have, or if there are sub teams, it depends on the organizational architecture, but there are ways how to find out what's the best architecture for that in that specific organization, so that we have some feedback loops and some digestion processes. And I don't think it must be very super extensive, and but sometimes we as an organization need that, and we need to or also to develop deeper bonds, relational bonds that strengthen our resilience. These kind of processes, however they be done, but like it's mainly about people being able to speak and that we create the safe environment for it. And I think if there is a good leadership that has some generosity, people will like to do that. If anyway the system is very scared and afraid of power abuse, of course, then it will be harder because it's not safe to open up. So we need to develop, it depends on the atmosphere in the organization, if there's a generous atmosphere or a scarce atmosphere. That's also important. But to create some more generosity, that we feel there's a way that our voices matter, I think is a very good process to do to strengthen the mutual trust in the organization and to jumpstart the motivation again, if that's sometimes lacking.
Yeah, brilliant. And I think also that in this particular course, one of the aspects of building on the last course is that there'll be an extra session just on the building of healing architecture, and also we'll have extra space in the integration sessions. There will also be a group for organizational leaders. And I also invite everyone in your triads to really explore this topic of what does healing architecture, how could it jumpstart in my organization? And there were many very strong questions coming in through the chat. So we'll also collect these and go through them afterwards. I just also want to really invite people who brought the question in the chat to also raise your hand if you want to bring it in here now. And we'll ask with you, Shan.
Thomas, in the time of technology, and I just have to thank you all so much for this work, so inspiring. In the time of technology, and when we're creating Zoom rooms, and when we have groups that are far and wide, I love Zoom, it works, I feel it. But I think with text messaging and email communication, we've got to be careful. And I have a policy myself that if there are really sensitive issues, that we do our best to, find interpersonal support for ourselves in person or in Zoom or in some way more connected than just through text or email. Do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I agree. That's my comment. Like especially if it's more sensitive stuff, or if there are conflicts or frictions, like we know that there is a high escalation rate of conflict through email. If people try to solve conflicts through email, that's usually not such a good idea. And so to pick up the phone or to jump on a Zoom, or to have a certain conversation should be preferred somehow in a relational setup, preferably where we can see each other and where we can feel each other. What we did here at the beginning, like just an attunement that I feel you and you feel me, makes the internet, like the virtual space, warm. And then it's almost as if we are sitting in the same room. It's like it can be very close. And what I also often suggest to practice is that sensing capacity, even if at the beginning it sounds a bit strange, but when I see you here and I can feel you, we do this very often. We can go into very deep processes, very refined, and it works really well. And we are still sitting thousands of kilometers apart. So, but even if I write an email or if I send a text message, I also feel the person. Before I write an email, I feel the person, even if it's just for 3 seconds. But I don't write an email without tuning in with the person. And I think if we commit to that, even if it's just an intention at the beginning, but many people we anyway know a bit, and if we think of them and we feel them, then it reduces the danger that we will just put kind of some disconnected content on each other. instead of also sometimes stuff that we wouldn't say the same way when we are in the same room. And that's why I advocate very much for text messages, emails, whatever. Feel the person, even if it's just for 2-3 seconds, and then write your email. And I think that's a great practice.
Thank you. I have one more point I want to bring up that's really important for me in comparing my work life to my home life, although I've merged them now, but in the past I had a lot more fear in the workplace. And it struck me that there's a sliding scale between domination and partnership, or between democracy, if you will, within an organization versus domination, and how to keep safe as a woman, single parent, financially, and self-expression in a workplace. And just comparing, what myself, oh, that's what happened in that workplace. It was financial fear that held me back. And then in my home life, more about how am I able to step up with my loved ones, and I'm facing more exclusion or fear of disconnect, and then when the two kind of do merge, because we create friendships at work, I find it, an interesting intrapersonal mix.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
That's my comment. And if you want to respond.
No, I think it's right. Like it's right that sometimes we feel that, I think also that healthy organizations can reduce the domination, which is not the clarity, and it's also not the competence-based hierarchy. I think that there are competencies needed, and certain people simply express more competence in certain places, so that also gives them a different voice. But they don't have the same voice in other places because maybe there they don't have that competence. So like but that it's a relational system that is based on competence and relationality. I think this is what we shift into, and that I see our democracies at the moment as detoxing the wounds of power over hierarchies. And the collective nervous system is slowly releasing more and more material in democracies that look like a disturbance to the democracy, because every time something deeper heals, it looks like actually a new level of fragmentation comes up. And I think we need to know this also in organizations, that sometimes organizations grow and everything looks great, and then there's a disruption, and then people think something is wrong versus think, there's a detoxification happening. And if we can allow that and not shut it down, it's like when my liver wants to detox toxins and then I shut it down, then the toxins stay inside. So, and I think in democracies like Me Too movement, or what in the US now around racism, that many things come up and they need to be processed in order to go to a new level of coherence that is more inclusive, that is more creates more equality and a better flow for everybody. And so I think the domination-based hierarchies, they are kind of fading out, but they are not, these are tendencies that we all carry over thousands of years in our nervous systems. And that we find conscious ways how to deal with the fears, how to work this as individuals and as organizations and as societies. I think that's a high skill, because for as people who facilitate groups or workshops know this, that many groups that go through different phases of coherence building, then it looks like, oh, now we reached a lovely coherence, and then something happens, boom, and it looks like a mess again. But if I think that is wrong, then I didn't understand the natural process of healing. If I can see that that's a detox of a new level, because we feel safer, more things can arise. And because we feel safer, we are safer to let go of stuff. And then it jumps to the next level of resilience. And I think that's a beautiful process, but it's challenging, especially for the leadership, because we might fast think that something is wrong. And then we put the wrong measures in place, and then we shut that process down. And so that's why
in Canada, we had truck drivers convoy to Ottawa, our capital, and not be listened to and not be heard after 2 years of COVID lockdowns and suppression of people's income and businesses. It was very disappointing. And I want other people to speak, but I just want to honor that we are working with Ukrainian people in this community, and I'm just so glad we can all talk together. Thank you, Thomas.
Yeah, thank you. Beautiful. Thank you, Shan.
Thank you, Shan. And we'll go to you next, Nikita.
Nice. Okay, I'm Nikita. I'm from Ukraine. And first of all, thank you so much for this information that is so clear and so structured. And yeah, and I have like few points to share, and this also to transmit it into questions. So you told that like trauma is disorganizing principle, but could we say also that trauma is somehow organizing principle, because it's also organized reality somehow? And if we told about, if we speak about organization, for example, like some big companies possibly could was made by from this like trauma, you know, like for example, if we speak about tobacco companies or alcohol companies, it's also people could make it because they want this power, they want this money, they want to control their life and control all things. So there are a lot of companies like that. And what I'm trying to say is how, in your opinion, like it's another part of question, it's more about how we work, for example, with tobacco companies. Does it make any sense for you or not? Or for example, there are some companies that they are the aim of the companies is money, actually, yeah? And now in nowadays many companies, they are like follow the trend to be focused on mission, to take care about people, but they still like sell alcohol, they still sell tobacco, because it's their business, that's how they make money. And it's what they do is also like they support this traumatizing atmosphere, yeah? And yeah, that's like the point, because I had experience to work with a tobacco company, and it's tricky. I don't know for this moment how to do that.
Yeah, I want to say at the beginning that I don't have any experience in working with tobacco companies, so I can't say anything about the inside of the company. So that's why I want to say this first. But what I want to say is that that what I think is good to look at is what kind of business, economy, entertainment, whatever aspects are connected to the side effects that trauma creates in our society. And I think that's really important, that the systemic traumatization brings forth, for example, certain levels of addictions or certain levels of patterns that are clearly based on trauma, and that certain economic branches are kind of making their money from. That's right. So it's not just that the trauma is the organizing principle of the organization, but the trauma is at the root of what causes that need. And I think what we need to work on is how to melt that need, that need can naturally grow into something else. And I think if we, for example, work on the reduction of tobacco consumption in the way of like addictive behavior that is really like a health scare for people, then that's a good thing to do. The question is just we can't just deal with it by looking at the symptom, which some of the companies are a part of. So we need to look at what helps us to deal with the issue itself. And I think if we do that, and if every one of us needs to check with what are the things that I want to support in the world, and what are the things that I don't want to support in the world, and where do I want to invest my own energy, and then certain systems will naturally decline, except they make an evolutionary step and they transform themselves into something new that is innovative and that actually creates an added value to the society that's different. And I think if we can do that, that's great. So we all have like a lot of power in our hands where we invest our energy and where we invest our competence, and how we take care of the systemic traumatization that creates a large scale need that, for example, comes in the form of addiction. So that's something we need to figure out more and more, and work together on the healing of it. And then certain things will naturally dry out. But yes, that's a big question. That's a big question. And I think there are multiple things in our society that fit that scheme.
Yeah, I guess, it's also like a big reflection. Like these companies are huge companies, and it's like reflection of like more complex and more big system, which is our society, social system. Yeah. And
Right.
yeah, we can't like I mean, these companies is also, we can watch at them like symptoms of bigger system.
Right. Exactly. And that because I think a lot of the trauma healing work is when our minds, our emotions, and our bodies come into a synchronization. And I think the reflection of that in millions or billions of people is that the economy system that we create will reflect the same, that nature, like the biosphere and humanity and our innovation, will be in sync with each other. And if we are not in sync with each other, and these are billions of people carry that fragmentation inside, so we create systems that naturally, for example, exploit our biosphere. So then we created an economy system that is showing collective trauma symptoms. And so, yeah, we see those symptoms, but really taking care of it, we can only through its integration, because otherwise we are trying to put intellectual patches on top of it, like solutions that don't really work. And then we get frustrated, and then we say it's a persistent problem. Yeah, it's persistent because we didn't take care of it on the level where it arises. And that's why some of the social issues simply stay. They are hard to take care of. And there it's exactly what you said. So yes, on the one hand, trauma is a disorganizing principle, but trauma also organizes itself into societal structures, and that it's an organizational principle as well. That was very well put by you before.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, and another point, it's like more simple. The question is more about, I used to work with people from companies, and for example with IT workers, and this like kind of meditation, mindful practice that we do in the beginning is like, it could be cool for us, like for people who like therapists, but it's really like could be very difficult for people who out of their bodies, who is like all day in their head. And if I give this mindful practice, they just like gonna frustrate, I know that because I have clients like that, and it's really, maybe we need some more playful from the beginning. I don't know. What do you think about that?
Yeah, it depends. You're right that it depends on the certain structure of people. For some people, mindfulness, meditation as such are great. And for some people, mindfulness practices are not easy at the beginning, but they can still learn it with more persistence. Even if at the beginning it's hard, they can actually still benefit from it. And for other people, it's sometimes better to start with more body-oriented or more movement-oriented practices that are, as you said, either more playful or they work more on the body. So it helps to create more magnetism to the body. Yeah. But you are right, meditation is not for everybody in the same way applicable. I think that's right what you're saying. And sometimes we need to be creative to invite certain people. But sometimes the practices might not be taught fully correctly, and then people don't learn how to regulate their stress, the upgoing energy, that they learn how to regulate that through their breath, and so that they can see after some time, oh, when I'm just thinking and I don't feel my body, I'm actually very stressed. And that I can learn to notice that I'm stressed, and then slowly to downregulate. And then I see, oh wow, I can learn that. That's something I can do. And and sometimes it needs the help of a good coach or a facilitator. And then over time, people see that they're actually making pretty fast progress. And then once they can regulate the stress, they can also go into deeper mindfulness. But yeah, that's right. And also, as we saw it in the 2 calls ago, that sometimes, when we are in like in a war situation or in a crisis situation, that it's hard to apply certain methods because there's so much fear and stress in the system. So then we maybe need to start with something else. That's well mentioned. Yeah.
Yeah, and you actually mentioned good about war, because if you speak about traumatizing experience in Ukraine now, so it's also there is like if you speak about Russian Federation, that is like one who traumatized Ukraine. It makes very good like organizing principle for Ukraine, because it's activate and mobilize people here, and all processes becomes more faster. Like this data exchange become faster, and everything here is now you can find like different vibration in Ukraine. It's like it's changing, and it's in a good way. So it's traumatizing somehow. It's like a big it's a drama, it's horrible, but also like very good positive things happens because of this traumatizing.
Yeah, I think it's like on the one hand, I'd agree with this, that in extreme situations, the systems are able to set free a lot of energy in order to deal with a crisis. But it's very important that once that stops, that it needs to be taken care of as immediately as possible. Because if not, then the energy collapses later, and then it leads to, like, when this extreme situation stops, then it can go into a deep depression and heaviness, because the system can't sustain this for such a long time. And so, yeah, like, but in these moments, I see it also here in Israel, like, because it's a bit similar with the ongoing war situation, that it sets free a high level of creativity, very fast responses. And so on the one hand, that looks sometimes for crisis situation very efficient, which it also is, but it also has the downside of it. So but if we can balance that, and if we know how to collectively balance it, then that would be a great addition, for Ukraine now in this phase. How we learn to balance the after effect.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, you have great questions. Thank you.
Yeah.
Or great statements.
Wonderful to hear from you, Nikita. It's great to have these voices coming from different places. Thank you. Shelley, we'll go to you next. You also brought a question in the chat. Over to you.
So I have a question, but I wanted to start with just a quick assessment of myself right now. This session has been really difficult for me. And I'm realizing there's a huge, I guess, a chasm between dealing with more personal trauma and taking it to organization. I feel like there's like a hole there. I'm like, oh my God, how do I bridge this? So, and it's interesting because my question is exactly about that. I'm literally building a new team, and I'm wondering if there's like preliminary processes, even just one, that I can put into place as I build it to help us have a foundation of coherence when we need it.
Yeah, I think in a way, taking some of the principles from the beginning and say, okay, what creates like a good team is like a level of maturity, that people can hold a certain level of personal maturity, but that we support in each other from the beginning, a level of relatedness. And if you build a team, then your level of relatedness and warmth and generosity and being present in the process of building a team sets a tone. So if you're in this situation, you are setting a tone, and that tone is like when you take a sailing boat and then it starts to sail, but it goes into a certain direction. And so that's why the way you assemble the team is a crucial factor. So if you bring in transparency, psychological safety, how people hold a relational space, what kind of values together, like how do we follow our mission together, like what's the mission, the purpose, and what's the relationality, the belonging to the mission. So then you have the force, you have the motivation, but you also have the team that becomes the organizing vessel for that motivation. And I think if we can bring that into a good that the becoming and belonging are in a good relation, because sometimes we are too outcome driven as a team, and then we pay a price on the relational level. Sometimes we are too based on the relational level, then we pay a price in the outcome level. And managing a team that is very related to the purpose, like to where we go together, but can hold a good functional relational space around it. So if they are fine-tuned, then I think we get the best, first of all, working environment and sustainability, and also outcome. And some teams burn their substance. They burn, like, people too outcome driven, and some of them are too heavy. So then it's too much emphasis. So finding a good balance between those two, I think, is great. And yeah, honesty, transparency, like the basic values that create psychological safety, authenticity, that there's a way to voice things that are stuck inside when stuff happens. If we set a value system at the beginning that encompasses those qualities, I think that's something that I would highly advocate for.
Okay. And as you're speaking, I'm sensing that I don't need to concern myself with the relationships between the team members. If I just have a healthy one with each of them, that will just sort of ripple out between them. Is that correct?
Yeah, yes and no. I mean, yes, your relationship is crucial, and also maybe also how that you're aware of how you're selecting people on your team. Like if you're building a team, sometimes our own biases create, they are connected to how we select people on our team. So that's also maybe another thing to look at. And then it is good to like be aware of the interpersonal relationships between the team members, that we have a feeling of that, because we hold a space not only from me to you, but also from you to her. and so that I'm aware if things feel strange, or if there's something that I feel an impulse to look at this or ask, or just be involved. I think that's that's an important leadership function, that we get things before they end up in strong dynamics, that there's still a way to interfere as early as possible, when things go a little bit strange or off. And I think a good systemic awareness, we intuitively pick up on things anyway. That's, that if you are present, then we get those things pretty early. So I think in that sense, it's important that you are also aware of how people interact with each other.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Does this speak to your question, or do you feel?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
We'll continue with Monica. Over to you, Monica.
Thank you. Thank you for letting me pose my question. I have a question about the bigger side of an organization. I work in a university where there's been a lot of trauma for many people at many levels, due to just authoritarianism, I would say. Just recently, there was an issue with the people in the higher levels of the organization being accused of harassment, of racism, and this was not acknowledged, not dealt with, just brushed under the carpet, and many people still reeling from it. It still feels terrible, and that as well compounded with intergenerational trauma because of racism, because of the violence of colonialism, because of just people being shut down and not heard. And right now I'm becoming a leader of a small portion of a small department, but it's all this heaviness that I feel in trying to deal with all these levels. And I wonder if there is anything you would suggest. I hear you with the building of the team. I find that those answers really, really helpful. So thank you for asking that question, the previous person that went before me. And at that level, at that, and I know there's a whole session on racism and that kind of trauma. But when all these things happen and kind of come at us from all these different directions, and I see my co-workers have been traumatized by this kind of arbitrariness that happens, and just living under capitalism is that kind of big system happening on us. And I wonder if there's anything you would any specifics, any practical ways of approaching this kind of situation.
Yeah, first of all, it's clearly to feel that you care. And I think that's the most important thing, is that it's important to you. Because the fact that I hear, when I listen to you, I hear your care in the question, that it matters to you, that there are racist tendencies, or I don't know much about your system, but when I listen to you, there are certain tendencies, there's harassment, there are the after effects of long intergenerational wounding. And of course, we can take care of it at once and right away, everything, but like the more people wake up and care and notice the symptoms and become curious. So your care and your curiosity are part of already kind of an immune cell in the system. And that's very important. So it's great to find out who are the immune cells, who are other immune cells that feel the same, and to create a network of it becomes an immune response. So I often say, if we want to create a movement somewhere, we all need to know how to gather our tribe. Like, who are the people that also care, that also want things to change, that also want that there is no racism anymore, there is no harassment anymore, that we take care of those wounds, that people who were affected by it have a space to speak, have a safe environment to, see that somebody cares, and that there is a space to melt what needed to be suppressed or held back. And so there is that whole practical side of things where you're caring and you becoming, I often see this as literally as immune cells, the people that start to notice the trauma and that care about it, so that it's enough motivation. Otherwise you wouldn't be here if there wasn't any motivation. So you're clearly interested. That connected to other people that feel similarly starts to create a network. And I think that network is also important. And the other thing is, on a more practical level or policy level, I think to work for implementing trauma-informed ways of doing things that are more standardized, that are more anchored in the system of the organization, also maybe in the legal system of the organization. That's an important part too. So how can we work on developing certain trauma-informed structures or policies that will be put in place that will protect certain people? I mean, that's also important. So there's that side of things, to work on the structure of an organization. And then there is the human side of things, where we work on the human relationships, and that when we create more healing relationships, people will start to trust that again. People will open up to that. People will feel that something new is happening. And especially if this is a time where you will have some more leadership responsibilities, that's great. And as I said, it's good to not look, how can we change everything? But how can I change where I have an influence at first? And then connect to other people that have also some influence and create networks. And then over time, the entire system will go through a change process, because it's inevitable. I think these are good ways, from the individual to the relational to the collective and to the policy level, how systemic structures are being implemented that will prevent certain things. And we learn and we upgrade also our organizational structure. I think that's also important.
Thank
Does
you
this
so much.
speak a little to your question?
Yes, it does. Not just a little. I just had a vision of those cells reproducing and generating, and hopefully eventually infecting or immuning the whole system. So thank you so much. It's very good. Thank you.
Yeah, and the most important thing is that you care. That touches me when you speak, and I feel your care. So then I feel this is the engine of your immune response. Yeah.
Right. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. How are we doing on time, Kosha? I think
we're doing beautifully on time. We're at the end of it for today. And yeah, but I also feel that it was such a rich session. We have collected at least 30 beautiful questions from the chat, so there is enough to continue with. And I also want to thank everybody. Wendy and Crystal are still here, but also the others who've been waiting with questions. Thank you for your patience, and yeah, really beautiful to hear from Shan and Nikita and Shali and Monica, each one bringing a different piece of the puzzle. And Thomas, just thank you to you. I think it was very rich.
For the home practice, I mean, since most of us will be in contact with organizations or work in organizations or work with them, and to look a bit how these recurrent patterns that seem repetitive are working, and then to contemplate a bit what can be like at a deeper root and what might be a different skillful response to that. Then to also look at maybe leaders or yourself as a leader, how your own trauma also creates dynamics within the organization, or a leader's somebody in leadership position, the trauma creates symptoms in the organization. So when we spoke about the organizing principle, it's the intelligence of the system, and the disorganizing principle is what looks like it jeopardizes the system. And it feels like a sand in the engine. It feels like issues, miscommunications, conflicts, tension, scarcity, lack of generosity, all those things. And the other part is, I think, where we look at the I think in any kind of environment, but especially for NGOs or for organizations that work a lot in a trauma exposure, I think when an organization is deeply trauma informed or trauma integrative, in our terminology, when we go up the ladder from trauma informed to trauma integrative organizations, then we see that we can actually turn scarcity into abundance. So we use the energy that we release in the trauma and we bring it into post-traumatic growth and systemic learning, and which I think is a deeply hopeful message. It means we can go into certain environments and literally create an upgrade in the social fabric. And I think how to do that, that should be the essence of a lot of research and a lot of work that we do in the world to show that that works, which I think will be very beneficial for big parts of our world. Yes, so that's maybe a contemplation for at home. And thank you, everybody. It was beautiful to be in this space together again. And I hand it back over to you. And thank you, Kosha, for the lovely hosting and holding, and our team in the background.
Yeah, thank you, Thomas. Yeah, and I'm already excited about how the outcomes of this course, you know, the seeds that we're all taking back into our organizations and communities, and also the mutual support that we can cultivate here. Yeah, what could grow out of that into the future? So, you know, of course, we'll send you the home practice also again in the email that comes out after here. In that email, we will also send you a rich array of different meetings in between our course modules that will be taking place. So affinity groups, practice groups, meetings for organizational leaders. So have a look and add them to your calendars. We're already looking forward to our next course module, which will be with Jens Riese on leadership and team resilience. So also filling up the gap between organizational and personal trauma and resilience that you were speaking to Shelley, I think. And then I also, so that will be on July 5th in 2 weeks' time. And then I also want to invite you next Monday. I actually recognize quite a lot of you were on the Pocket Project community call yesterday. So you're also warmly invited to our community calls, where we sometimes refresh some of the skills that we also learn on this course. And next Monday, we have a global social witnessing call, which will be on the topic of footprints of colonialism, looted artifacts. So most precisely looking at looted artifacts and objects from Africa that are currently lying in museums in Europe. And this will be with Sunita Amba, and I will support the facilitation of the call. Yeah, that's it from our side. Please continue to share any questions you might have. And as Thomas said today, we might not be able to take care of everything immediately, but the more we care and the more we wake up, each of us becomes immune cells in the systems we work with. And as we start networking with each other, we start initiating an immune response together. So thank you for being part of this, and we look forward to seeing you again soon. Much love.